Hey everybody. Today's module is on it's a very brief introduction to the reproductive system of both males and females. And we're going to talk about all of these things. Actually, STDs and birth control are going to be bonus modules that will be bonus on the next test. But we're going to go through functions and overview, the male and female anatomies, and ovulation and fertilization as part of this module. You may be asking, what's with the cats? Well, I went to a good talk. It was actually in a bar. It's a long story, where someone was talking about the history of syphilis prevalence and how in, whatever eras, people would get syphilis. And if you have really advanced syphilis, it actually leads to delusions of grandeur. And so a lot of people in history who tried to take over the world may have had syphilis. Like Hitler probably had syphilis, according to this theory or this hypothesis. And so, but what she did in her talk was it was in a public place and she didn't want to freak people out with pictures of horribly gross STD-ridden, vulvas or penises. And so she always had, whenever there's something gross in her slides, she had a picture of a kitten. Or a puppy, or a goat, or whatever. And it just kind of made it a little less weird to look at, just to have something thrown in your face, but then also something cute. So you could kind of look really quickly at the gross thing, and then look quickly at the kitten if it made you more comfortable. And so I have provided this opportunity as well. If you don't want to be faced with the labia right in your face when we're talking about the anatomy of the female reproductive system, you could glance quickly at the kitten and then look back at what you're supposed to be looking at if you need kind of a refresher, okay? Also, don't forget this is a video. If you need to stop, don't forget you can pause it and come back to it, obviously. Okay, let's go. Let's talk about what's happening. We are going to be talking about the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system. In both cases, the reproductive organs are the things that make the gametes, or the eggs or the sperm, and they also make sex hormones, okay? Everything else is all about delivery of those gametes. So in the case of the females, we're talking about the ovaries, that's these parts. And in the case of the males, we're talking about the testes, and that's these parts. So these are the parts that make the actual gametes. So these make sperm, these make eggs. Everything else involved is just about getting those gametes to meet the other gametes and then to make babies, okay? These also make sex hormones to kind of regulate themselves and then regulate the rest of the body, so everything's all in sync to make reproduction happen. You may notice there is some similarity in shapes here, and that is actually on purpose. Well, I don't know about purpose, but that is okay. So this is getting a little too detailed, but before when a fetus is forming and it's trying to either become male or female, some people say that the default state is female. That's false. There's actually a default state that's kind of in between both of these, and you have to have the presence of the SRY gene on the Y chromosome to make a male turn into this system. Okay, where most of this is internal and then this is external. Well, all of this is internal. These are internal. This is external. And then in the case of the female, you have to have the presence of two X chromosomes to create a functional female reproductive system. But there's a lot of analogous structures. Like in males, this thing becomes a testes, but the precursor to this, if it doesn't have the presence of that SRY gene, it becomes the ovaries. Okay, you can also see that these tubes are analogous to these tubes. It's a delivery system for those gametes, and then to move from the reproductive structure to the rest. And then the uterus is kind of taking over whatever's happening here we'll talk about. And then this section, the vagina, which is the internal part, and then if we talk about the labia also, those parts are analogous to the penis. And so it looks similar and they work together well because they are derived from the same tissue originally. Okay. So this is, you may notice this is very cisnormative and heteronormative, in that we're just going to be talking about males and female reproductive systems working functionally together. That is in no way a way to, by no means, that's what I'm trying to say, by no means a way to talk about, I'm not trying to do any kind of trans erasure or not talk about any kind of gay sexual activity, but we are just talking about, in this case, the function of the male reproductive system, and then once sperm hits an egg, we'll also talk, well, even previous to that, we'll talk about the female reproductive system, and we won't get into any kind of sexual politics at all in this case. We can if you want to talk about it offline, but that's not what this module is about. Okay, so why do we even reproduce at all? What is the point? So the function of the reproductive system is to make a new individual that is similar, so functional, but not identical to the parent. So the idea is you take half, so all, or humans at least, have 2 copies of every gene. We have 23 genes, sorry, not genes, we have 23 chromosomes. Each chromosome is a piece of our entire DNA that contains millions of genes. And then, so we have 23 pairs of those, one from mom, one from dad. When we make gametes, when we make an egg or a sperm, they have half as many chromosomes as you start with. So if you have 46 total chromosomes here, 46 total chromosomes here, you will make an egg with only 23 chromosomes, and then a sperm, the male will make a sperm with only 23 chromosomes. So then when they come together to fertilize to create the new individual, you're going to get a zygote or embryo that has only half of the mom's DNA and half of the dad's DNA to go back to having 46 chromosomes in the end. So you want to make sure you start with half of mom and half of dad to make a whole new individual organism. Okay? Otherwise, you'll get extra copies of genes. You'll get extra copies of DNA, of just whole chromosomes. And we know from the case of Down syndrome, where you have just one extra chromosome out of 46, you suddenly get a very different functional organism, right? So, well, that's kind of getting harsh. So you get, there definitely is a difference between someone who has Down syndrome and somebody who doesn't, and it's only based on one extra, very small chromosome. Okay, so the amount of DNA you have is very important. It's also important to, so some organisms function a little bit differently. So if you ever heard of a liger is a lion and a tiger. So let me look it up. Real quick. So this is a liger. Okay, so a liger is the situation where you have a male lion mating with a female tiger and you get a hybrid. But these are they're not considered a new species. Here's another example. They're very big. But you'll notice there's definitely some differences between this and a healthy lion. It's got shorter legs. It doesn't have that big lion headpiece. It's got a very large body. It also has very large internal organs. And they tend to die very young due to just non-functional organs and just some other cancers. And they cannot reproduce because when the male lion and the female tiger come together, the male lion gives like 23 chromosomes and the female tiger is like 22, and you end up with 45 chromosomes. And then that can't split nicely into two, either an egg or a sperm with a number of chromosomes that can then reproduce again. If the egg or sperm cannot, let me see how I'm trying to say this. This is back when we talked about meiosis. So if you are dividing your DNA in half, if you can't divide it perfectly in half, so you have, an even number on either side, it's not going to form, is what usually happens. So if you start with 2n equaling 45 instead of 46, you can't split that evenly into a nice round number, and so you can't make eggs or sperm. So if we somehow end up with the wrong number of chromosomes when we are born, we usually then are infertile as a result and can't go on to produce more organisms or babies. Fun fact. Moving on. Okay. Here's our cat. It's kind of big. I'm going to make him a little bit smaller. Okay, so let's talk about first the male reproductive organs. Males are a bit less complicated than females, at least at the reproductive level. Let's talk about what's happening. So males are interesting in that the male reproductive system and the male organism in humans is interesting because they have a constant production of hormones at constant levels. Hint, hint, very important. So after puberty hits, males have a continuous production of gametes or sperm, just constantly sperm all the time. Whenever you need it, there is sperm ready for you. Okay, so that is going to become really important because that's not what we see in females. Okay, so very important point to make here. So what's happening, if we look at this, we're looking at a cross-section of a male where you're seeing a cross-section here. We see that so a lot of times in popular culture or in colloquialisms, we use these words really interchangeably if we say scrotum or balls or testicles or whatever. But let's get specific here. So the testicle, usually people are referring to the testis itself. So that's the part that makes the sperm. Okay, the testicle could also refer to the testis and the epididymis together. Okay, so we'll talk about what this does in a second, but so the testis is what makes the sperm. It also makes testosterone. Okay, very, very important. You need testosterone to produce sperm, and then also the sperm help to kind of kickstart the process of testosterone, sort of. Okay, we'll go with the idea that testosterone is needed to produce sperm. Okay, so what is the scrotum for? Why does the testis hang outside of the body anyway? It's very sensitive. This is where gametes are produced. So if this is where your sperm are being made, why is it outside of the body if it's so important to reproduce? Well, it turns out they are very heat sensitive. These sperm, they have to be just exactly functional. So having the testis outside of the body by hanging in the scrotum causes the testis to be 3 degrees cooler than the rest of the body. And this is necessary for spermatogenesis, or the production of sperm. Okay, so if you're male, or if you've read in books or heard people describe, when people are cold, they get shrinkage. What that usually is referring to is the scrotum pulls in, because then if it's too cold, the sperm won't be produced. So the sperm want to be closer to the heat of the body, so the testis will be retracted closer into the body. Okay, if it's really hot, this tends to elongate, and then the testicles will hang lower. Before puberty, the testis is actually up in the body, and then they fall as they get closer to the arrival of puberty. All right, so what is the big deal with sperm anyway? So sperm, let's talk about the parts. Hint, hint. The sperm structure, people talk about how there's a head and there's a tail, but it's a little bit more than that, okay? So sperm are produced in the seminiferous tubules of the testis, okay? So important word there. The seminiferous tubules are the internal structure of the sperm. They look like this. They're very convoluted, so they have a lot of extra surface area. And within that region, that's where the sperm are produced. We'll talk more about those. There's also cells in between where the sperm are being made in the seminiferous tubules that produce testosterone. So the sperm itself has the head, okay? It has on top of it what's called the acrosome, which is very important. That's what can burrow into the egg once it makes contact. It contains a hydrolytic enzyme. That means it breaks stuff down, okay? So that's really important because it breaks down the outer layer of the egg so it can actually get in and fertilize. Underneath the acrosome is the nucleus. So the sperm started out as a normal cell, okay? And then it went through meiosis, and it produced 4 sperm. Each one has half as much DNA as the original parent cell. And then everything else that was originally in that cell went away. So there's no organelles, there's no Golgi apparatus, there's not a lot of cytoplasm, there's nothing in here except the DNA. Okay, that's it. There might be some ribosomes, who cares? It's basically just the DNA of the original cell, okay? Then it grows a tail, okay? The tail is just for propulsion to get it where it needs to go. And then it has a midpiece here, which has a whole lot of mitochondria in it. Remember that mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. So why is it important to have something here that gives you a lot of energy? Oh, you need it to power the action of the tail. So sometimes when people have low fertility, it might be because the mitochondria in their sperm is not giving them very much energy, and then their sperm can't travel very far. One of many ways to have low fertility. All right. Let's talk about spermatogenesis, or how sperm is created. So this is the testis, okay? This is the epididymis we'll talk about, and then it continues, okay? This is the urethra. So, nope, not the urethra. We'll get there. Okay, so, let me move this kitten over here. So, inside of the testis, if we were to take a cross-section of the seminiferous tubules, and then we flip it around so we can see what's happening, this is what it looks like under a slide. Okay, each one of these little purple dots is a stem cell called a spermatozoon. Okay, spermatozoon cell, and these are basically where these will then go through meiosis to produce the sperm cells. As the sperm is maturing, it kind of gets pushed and pushed and pushed to the center of this tube, and as its tails are produced and it becomes more functional, you can see these tails hanging in, and you can see a sperm getting kind of pulled off here. The tails hang into the lumen of the tubule, and then when the sperm is totally ready, it falls into the tubule and gets taken through all the tubes, oh my goodness, to then be stored in the epididymis here so that it can mature completely. So in between these purple cells, these spermatozoans, there are cells that make testosterone. So it's just kind of all in here. Okay, that's what you need to know. All right, cool. Keep going. What's happening? So seminiferous tubules are inside the testis. Then, so sperm is made there. And then what happens? It travels into the epididymis, the section right on top, and it stays there. Just this part, the epididymis is so folded up, but it's about 20 feet long if you were to stretch it out completely. So all the sperm gets shoved into the epididymis, and it waits, and it waits, and it matures, and it waits. And then what is it waiting for? It's waiting for ejaculation, okay? And so then what happens? We have the vas deferens, which is the tube that then takes the mature sperm and lets it travel. Oh, and then it's going to travel through some ducts, okay? It's going to travel through this duct, which we'll talk about in a second. It's going to go past another duct, the ejaculatory duct. That is part of the vas deferens. As soon as it leaves the ejaculatory duct, it enters into the tube that's in the penis. And now this is also where the bladder brings in its contribution. So this is now a shared tube for both sperm or semen at this point and urine. And we'll talk about what the difference between sperm and semen is. And this then is what actually leaves the body. Okay. So when the tube is in the penis itself, it is called the urethra. And so remember, there's a urethra in females too. In this case, the urethra has a shared function of being both the reproductive and urinary tract out of the body. All right. So males start making sperm at puberty. When do they stop making puberty? Probably never. They have to run out of testosterone to stop making puberty, and there is something called andropause, maybe, it's not super well researched, where males start making less testosterone than they used to make, so they make less sperm as a result, and having less testosterone means you have less libido and other things, and libido is sex drive, and so you can actually it's very well researched how to fix this problem, and that's by taking certain medications that reproduce testosterone, but that's where they give you more testosterone basically, or they fix whatever missing link in that testosterone chain is gone, and so then that you basically can produce sperm until you die, if you're a male. Okay, so how far does sperm travel? If you were to map out the entire seminiferous tubule that a sperm has to travel, and all of the epididymal tubes, and then how far it has to travel, oh my god, it is about a fifth of it's about 750 feet is how far it has to travel. Okay, so that is it. Let's see. Yeah, I think that feels a little crazy town, but that's what my notes say. We're just not going to talk about it. So let's talk about what the glands do. Let's move on. Let's talk about the glands. Okay. So if this is both reproductive and urinary, because we have the urinary tract being connected at the urethra, you don't want your sperm to come into contact with urine. That, first of all, you cannot have an erection, a true erection, and also urinate. Okay, the tube gets cut off, and so you can't urinate while having sex, like internally. Like, don't think about it too much. And part of that is because you don't want the urine urine is really acidic and you don't want it to kill the sperm. Okay, so you have to have things that come kind of before the sperm. Oh, that was a bad choice of words. That goes through the tubes before the sperm to get rid of that acid. Okay, so there are some, when you get to the seminal vesicle, not to be confused with the seminiferous tubules, which are here, you are secreting this alkaline substrate or substance or basic substance that will neutralize that acid. Yay, it neutralizes the acid. Awesome. You also have a secretion from stuff like the prostate gland and the bulbourethra gland, which are acting they're feeding the sperm, they're giving them more fructose so they can travel better. You also get prostaglandin. Okay, so prostaglandin is a hormone that causes contractions. That's a hormone that causes women to go through contractions when they're giving birth. It also causes the vaginal canal to go through contractions, which pushes the sperm further up into the vaginal canal. Okay, so that's good. We're neutralizing the sperm. Also, it turns out that if you have a good amount of alkaline substance inside of so once you've started mixing the sperm with all these seminal fluids, so the stuff from the seminiferous tubules and the bulbourethra glands and the prostate, then you are now called semen. You also include a lubricant, okay, because you can't get that semen traveling up very far in the vagina if it's not lubricated. So you add a bit of lubricant. It also helps it move through the penis easier. Anything else here? Oh, yeah. So the prostate gland, which adds more seminal fluids. Sometimes it can be enlarged just by its being. So by the way, this is the bladder here, this big orange thing. It ends up being enlarged later in life, and that problem with that is that then kinks the flow of fluids from leaving the body, so it's harder to get those seminal fluids to flush out the urethra, and so you have bacteria that haven't been flushed out, and they can then lead to UTIs. So that is something to keep in mind. That's what, and also if the prostate gland gets too enlarged, it could be due to cancer, and so that's why it's very important to have your prostate gland checked. All right, cool. What's happening on the, so that's all internal. What's happening externally? Let's talk about the penis. So the penis is the copulatory organ. Okay, so it's homologous or the same as or similar to the clitoris in the female. In fact, the same tissue that creates the head of the penis is literally the clitoris. In females that have a very, very high level of testosterone, such as bodybuilders taking anabolic steroids, the clitoris begins to look like a penis. It starts to get bigger. It takes on the very characteristic shape of a penis, and so you can tell it's definitely just one hormone away from becoming a male copulatory organ. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the analogy. Okay, so the penis is just what it takes to get the semen into a female, okay? The enlargement at the end is called the glans penis. It is the more sensitive part. And then the foreskin is a fold of skin which sheathes the penis. It sheathes the whole thing, okay? In Western culture and some religious cultures, people get circumcised often. For a long time, there was this idea in Victorian culture, especially in America, that the circumcised penis is cleaner. And so it became when you think about a penis, you're thinking like an erect penis, you're thinking about a circumcised penis. And so it's kind of, it's not being forced upon families like it used to in hospitals, but people definitely are asked when their kids are born, do you want to go through circumcision or not? So if, let's see, there is sometimes people, when they do it for religious reasons, they bring in someone who is a religious figure and they are not a doctor, and they sometimes can create this can create problems because you want to have a circumcision when you're a baby so you don't remember that pain, but if you're having someone who's not a medical professional do it, sometimes they chop parts off that are not just the foreskin, and there's been a lot of cases where there's a botched circumcision, and there's a very famous case, I think in the 80s, 70s or 80s, where there were twins, boy twins. They went through the circumcision, but they messed up one of them, and they cut off so much of the penis that they said, let's just, let's cut the whole thing off, and let's just raise them to be a girl. We'll just give them hormones forever so that they'll be a girl. Well, it turns out that doesn't work because the brain in that case was male, and then it took them until puberty, to figure out what exactly was quote-unquote wrong with them. It turns out you can't just force someone to grow up as the opposite sex and expect everything to be great. And so that's an interesting case if you want to go into it and look at it. The important point being that now people tend to only let medical professionals perform circumcisions. There's nothing wrong with not being circumcised. It's just it is a religious or a lifestyle choice that people make. Okay, let's talk about the penis in cross-section. Again, remember, if this makes you uncomfortable, look at the kitten. So if we look at the penis in cross-section, we're looking at the urethra is coming this way. That's the hole that you see, okay? And then this is the skin all around it. So how does a penis become erect? So there's two different ways that erections can happen in nature. A lot of animals have a bone inside of their penis, so they don't have these deep arteries that human males do. They have just one central bone, okay? And then they have a muscle that is basically connecting the bone here to here, and that causes the erection. It just like flips it up, okay? That's basically about it. So in the case of humans, so you may think, wow, that's such a good system, but it's actually not. So the human system is better because in this case, the erection is determined by how much blood goes into the penis, okay? And then once the blood enters through the arteries, you can actually occlude the veins or block the veins. So then the blood is coming in, but it can't come out until ejaculation happens. And we didn't talk about it, but the ejaculatory duct here is a muscle that helps cause ejaculation. Okay. I guess it's so my thing about 750 feet wasn't too crazy. If the seminiferous tubules are 1,500 feet long. Okay, moving back on. Da, da, da. So the ejaculatory duct causes. So wait. The ejaculatory duct is it's this duct here, and it has a muscle to it. So there's a muscular component to this duct. The blob around it is the prostate gland. Okay, so there have been actual studies where people go and they say, how far do people ejaculate? And so you can imagine the call for that. Come into the lab and let us measure how far you ejaculate. It's just whatever. Okay, so most people do not ejaculate, they don't ejaculate very far, but there have been cases where people ejaculate up to 5 feet. That's definitely not the norm. Okay, and it's all about how strong is that ejaculatory duct. Okay, all right. Let's keep going. So blood comes in through the deep arteries, and then the dorsal vein, if you look at it, the vein is so small, and so once this tissue starts to fill up with blood, this gets blocked. And so then it's hard for the blood to then leave until you release the pressure. Yeah, that's all I want to say about there. All right, so let's talk about, so this is all mediated through hormones, and you're going to see that the two big hormones that cause the male reproductive cycle and the female reproductive cycle are the same. So there's follicle stimulating hormone, and then there's luteinizing hormone. These two are the same in both male and females. It just depends on if you're going to cause estrogen or testosterone to be produced in large amounts, okay? So by saying, you can't say that estrogen is the female hormone and testosterone is the male hormone, because actually both sexes have both. It's just that males have a whole lot more testosterone when compared to their estrogen levels. So FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, is produced in the pituitary gland, and it stimulates spermatogenesis. So it goes and it says, hey guys, it's time to make some sperm, okay? And it does that when testosterone causes this signaling to start happening, okay? And really, it's the signaling coming from the hypothalamus, which is the part of your brain that takes in all of this external signaling, like sunlight and season, and maybe do you smell an ovulating female? So we don't know when we're smelling ovulation, but our brains do, okay? There have been studies where they have people come in and they give them 3 sweaty t-shirts, and they say, rank these t-shirts in how disgusting they smell. Which one smells the worst? Which one smells the second worst? Which one smells the least worst? And then, so if it's the least worst, it must be smelling the best. It's a weird idea. And they have routinely shown that males prefer females. They think females smell less after working out if they are ovulating. So they have a more pleasant smell after a serious workout if ovulation is happening. There was also, well, we'll get into it in a second. That doesn't mean you stop working out, okay? That just means that we are tuned into the smell of people ovulating. And if that smell then causes you to start producing sperm in a higher level, or produce sexual behaviors, it makes sense that evolution pushed for that. Okay, so follicle stimulating hormone produces or stimulates the production of sperm, while luteinizing hormone, which is also in the pituitary, stimulates testosterone production. So you need both of these, and it's the production of a lot of testosterone that actually goes back and shuts this whole system off. So that there's a system, it's called negative feedback, where if all of a sudden you have plenty of testosterone, that it's saturated your blood and it gets back up to your brain, it tells your brain, okay, cool, we have enough levels, we don't need to have any more, I'm going to turn this off because the system is good, okay? So this is why people who are taking a lot of anabolic steroids that mimic testosterone tend to have fertility problems. They have serious atrophy of their testicles, because what they're actually doing is they're shutting off their entire system unnaturally, and then the body doesn't understand how to kick it back into regular production once they're off the steroids, and so it decreases fertility overall. Okay, so FSH makes sperm happen, and then LH causes testosterone to increase. And testosterone does so many different things that we just can't even get into right now. Okay, so when does puberty happen? So this all starts when puberty happens, okay? So puberty happens between the ages 10 and 14. There's some signal coming from GnRH that says, hey, it's time for reproduction to happen. And then the testicles descend. They start very far back, okay, kind of where the ovaries are in females. And then they just kind of follow this pathway until they leave the body completely. But are housed in the scrotum. So this is dangerous. This is the point where you can get what's called testicular torsion, where if they don't fall correctly over the pubis, then they kind of twist a little bit, and that can be dangerous. You can actually, if you twist it a certain way, if torsion happens in a certain way, you cut off the blood flow to a testis, and it can die very easily. Very dangerous. Okay, let's keep going. So what is puberty? Puberty is marked by, this is also, by the way, this is the textbook picture of someone in puberty. I can't even tell you how ridiculous it is. So I like my puberty cat, my punk cat. Okay, so puberty is marked by a rise in testosterone, okay? Testosterone is responsible for the primary and secondary sexual characteristics. So primary is just, at puberty you get an enlargement of the sexual organs, and the secondary sex characteristics are growing hair where you didn't have hair before, growing a larger larynx. Okay, so why does this happen? So testosterone causes muscles to increase in size. Well, the larynx is a set of muscles, and so that testosterone causes them to get bigger, which then means that if you have a bigger thing to vibrate, you have a deeper sound. So that's why male voices are deeper than female voices. Okay, it's also why the Adam's apple develops, because the larynx gets bigger and actually pushes out of the throat and creates the obvious Adam's apple. Bones also get heavier because you start growing bones and you get your growth spurt basically. You can also develop baldness if you have and serious aggressive issues if you have a very too high of a level of testosterone without kind of the understanding of what's happening. So humans are one of the only animals that wear well, no, they're not. Okay, testosterone is very, very closely linked to aggression in most animals. All right, that was all male. Let's talk about female. So the female reproductive organs are, so first of all, female reproduction, females have a cyclical production of hormones, and they vary. And what that means, we have a cyclical production of eggs. We don't have a constant supply of eggs just ready to fertilize like crazy, which is good because since we have internal fertilization and internal development of eggs, you don't want to have like 10 babies going on at one time, but they're all happening in different stages. Okay, you only want to have one or however many babies at a time. One to, whatever the current highest level, like John and Kate plus 8 nonsense is, to make sure you don't destroy your uterus. Okay, so females have that cyclical production of hormones and variable levels, which leads to a cyclical production of eggs. And so what is happening? The ovaries are the actual reproductive organs. Okay, these are the ones that are making the eggs. Okay, they produce not just estrogen but also testosterone. Okay, and that helps lead to the production of eggs. The uterus is this incredibly muscular organ. Look at this muscle. Holy cow, it's so huge. That's designed to support the growth of a baby, and it is very finicky and ridiculous, amazing organ. Let's talk about it. It's not ridiculous, it's amazing. Okay, so let's talk about the fallopian or uterine tubes. Your book calls it the uterine tube sometimes. So how does an egg go from the ovary to the uterus? Well, remember in the case of the males, we had the testis being connected to the external region by the vas deferens. Well, in the females, we have the ovaries attached by the fallopian tubes. Who was Dr. Fallopius was the guy, or whatever his name is, was the guy who discovered the fallopian tubes, and so he got named by it. They also sometimes are called uterine horns by people who are studying sharks, whatever, more so than humans, but it's the most common way we refer to them is the fallopian tubes. Okay, so the distal or faraway end of the fallopian tube is not actually connected to the ovary. It's way out in space like this. Why? Why would you do that? It actually makes a little bit of sense. If you have sperm that make it all the way up here and all the way up here, you don't want them invading your ovary and just wreaking havoc and causing all the developing eggs to suddenly become fertilized. So you want a bit of a gap, okay? Which means when ovulation or the production of the egg happens, it has to shoot across this space in order to get picked up by the fimbriae, or the finger-like projections of the fallopian tube, and then get carried into the fallopian tube itself. Okay, so the fallopian tubes are about 10 centimeters long. They're lined with cilia, or these little hairs that help move them down the entire way. And there's actually an area that's been very recently discovered called the what do they call it? The oh my God, it's the sugar womb room, where there's just a place in the fallopian tubes that just leaks a whole bunch of fructose into the environment. And so it's thought of the environment of the fallopian tube. So it's thought, why is there just sugar region? It's crazy. And it's thought, actually, this is, if you're a sperm and you've been traveling all the way up the system and you're getting here, your tails are probably starting to run out of juice. Okay, and so they're starting to slow down. And so there's a part where the fallopians sit like, good job, guys. Here's an orange. Keep running. Okay, so like at a marathon, you get an orange, keep running. And so that could be part of it. It also could be providing more sugar for the egg to maintain itself as it's traveling down this tube. Okay. What else is happening? Okay, so usually fertilization happens in the fallopian tube. So this is where the sperm and the egg meet. But you have to keep moving, okay? You don't want an ovary to become fertilized in the fallopian tube. It is not set up to support a fetus, okay? If you have an embryo implanting in the fallopian tube, reproduction is actually it's hard on the body. And so it's going to, like, if you have a fertilized egg that just settles here and doesn't go into the uterus, it's going to try its hardest to produce a placenta here where it cannot be supported. There's not enough blood flow, but your body's really going to try and make blood flow happening, or make it happen. This is called an ectopic pregnancy, and it can actually lead to the death of the mother. And I don't think there have been any, I don't know, I think there are very, very, very rare instances where an ectopic pregnancy actually leads to a live birth. As far as I know, it actually never happens. So it could lead to the death of both the mother and the child. So one of the very first things you do if you're pregnant is you go in to get an ultrasound to make sure the pregnancy is happening in the uterus where it's supposed to be. So it takes between ovulation and when the ovum gets, which is a singular egg, gets into the uterus, takes about 72 hours. All right, so what's happening? So this is a better, more realistic view. Look how in awe the cat is of what's happening. Here's our ovary. Here's the fallopian tube with its fimbriae kind of hanging out around it to catch the egg. And then this is the fallopian tube. There's a bunch of connective tissues, and there's a bunch of blood vessels feeding everything, because we need that all the time. And then these connective tissues are just kind of holding everything in place, okay? So let's move from the fallopian tube into the uterus itself. So this is where the embryo implants. So the fertilized egg will implant in the uterus, and a baby develops, okay, if fertilizations happen. So here's our egg. It's been shot out of the ovum. It has to get picked up by, it's a ridiculous process. We'll talk about it. So what else happens? So the uterus is this very heavily muscled, highly lined structure that holds the baby if a baby is being produced. The cervix is the part of the uterus that protrudes into the vaginal canal. So the vaginal canal is here. I mentor a group of high school girls, and one time one of them said to me, yeah, when I shave my vagina, I'm like, first of all, I don't need to hear this, and second of all, you don't shave your vagina. If you're shaving pubic hairs, you're shaving your vulva, that is the external part. The vaginal is all internal, and you'll notice it has this ridging. That's because it's muscular, okay? Remember, the prostaglandins that are in semen cause this to contract, to push semen even closer to the cervix. Okay, so the cervix acts as the entryway between the vaginal canal and the uterus, and it's highly selective. This is, again, a region where you don't want bacteria and viruses and funguses and whatever else getting into this incredibly sensitive system. So the cervix is the barrier to make sure nothing can, okay? It has a very intense mucus plug that, because again, anytime you have the external environment interacting with the internal environment, these two environments interacting, you want to have some way to protect yourself from bacteria and everything else. All right, so there's so much we could talk about with periods. I'm not going to go into it in this. The lecture will be a million years long, but I am going to post 2 videos that are really good 10 Ed videos that you should watch, especially if you are someone who has a period, who used to have a period, who should have a period but for whatever reason doesn't, or you know anyone who has a period, which means everyone should watch these videos so you understand better what people are going through and what causes it. But we're going to move on. We're going to talk just very, very briefly about the layers of the uterus. So there's two big ones to understand, and that's the endometrium and the myometrium. So endo means inside and myo means muscle, okay? So the endometrium is the very thickened layer that sits on top of the myometrium, which is the muscular layer, okay? The myometrium is what contracts during labor to actually cause parturition or expulsion of the baby out of the body. But the endometrium is what gets really thick and provides so many nutrients to provide the beginnings, what's going to nourish the fetus during pregnancy. So every month your body's like, yes, pregnancy's going to happen. Oh my God. Oh wait, no, it didn't happen. Oh, well then we're going to shed this instead and get rid of it. And that's what menstruation is. All right, so this is kind of looking at it more intensely. This is the endometrial gland, and this is the myometrial gland. Some people suffer what's called endometriitis, and that's where this tissue actually travels to other parts of the body. It's still subject to the same hormones that cause it to grow, and so then it starts to grow in very strange places, like inside of attached to your kidneys or your liver or whatever, and it can be very painful and it can lead to scarring and infertility. So if you experience painful periods, it's very important to ask doctors about endometriitis. Okay, don't let it happen to you. Let's look at the cross-sectioning of the female reproductive system. I didn't mean for this cat to be here. Put it up. There we go. All right, so again, cross-sectioning. What's happening? So here is the bladder. Okay, here is the uterus. And you can tell it's the uterus because the fallopian tubes come off of it and attach to the ovaries. Okay, the bladder does not. So notice that this is two different holes. Okay, so this is the anus and this is the rectum. Okay, this leads to the colon. And notice that we have oh good, this shows us. Okay, so we have this is the bladder. This is what you urinate from. This is the vaginal canal. Anything you see externally is usually a labia, and then the whole thing as a whole is called the vulva, okay? So you'll notice that the clitoris goes way up here. There's a very large, this actually isn't very big. It shows a very, very big thing. There's a huge debate over whether or not females can have not ejaculation. Well, that's a thing too. But whether females can have orgasms if they don't stimulate the clitoris, my opinion is mind your business. But there's a lot of research actually showing that the clitoris, so the clitoris is a intense bundle of nerves. Okay, and there's a lot of research showing that while this is the external part, it goes internal and then actually hugs the vagina, okay? And so what people are calling the G spot or the whatever spot may actually just be an extension of the clitoris itself that actually causes stimulation or is stimulated when sexual reproduction is happening or internal stimulation is happening. Okay, moving on. All right, so this is the external view of what's happening with the female reproductive system. So again, what we were just looking at here is where the clitoris is. Some people have a hooded clitoris, some people don't. The labia majora is the bigger kind of cloaking device going on here, while the labia minora is this part. People's labias are incredibly varied. There are a lot of really cool art projects where they're trying to increase this idea that labias don't have to look the same. Okay, there's this weird idea that everyone should look exactly the same externally, and that is silly. Okay, so don't worry about that. The urethral opening is here. That's, again, how you urinate. Usually you never even see it or notice it or anything unless you have a UTI. And then the vaginal opening is here. Again, this whole region is called the vulva. Not Volvo, that's a car. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the ovaries. What's happening in the ovaries? Okay, so we talked about how sperm are produced, okay? So it's this constant level of LH and FSH just causing sperm production all the time. And then it matures in the epididymis, and oh my goodness. So what is happening in the ovary? It's so much more complicated. So female eggs, or female gametes, or which are called eggs or oocytes, are made in the ovary through gametogenesis or oogenesis. These stem cells are actually all basically very close to being eggs when you're born, okay? So you It's very weird to think about, but when your mom was pregnant with you, if you're a female, you already contained the eggs that will become your children. Weird and crazy. So the eggs that will then go through ovulation to produce your own kids were produced before you were ever born. But they're not ready to ovulate and be fertilized until you go to puberty, okay? So, the follicle is the thing, it's basically the egg progenitor. So it's a thing that kind of houses the developing eggs and some accompanying cells, which are going to become really important soon. So if this is an ovary and we just track one cell over time, okay, so it's not that they like travel in this direction, it's just an easy way to kind of think about it. So if we start with a follicle, well, the follicle stimulating hormone, guess what that was named for, is produced again by the pituitary just like in males, okay? And what it does, in males it goes and causes spermatogenesis to happen, so the production of sperm. In females it causes one specific follicle, whichever one is determined to, and actually that stimulates between 5 and 20 follicles a month, but we'd like to kind of think about just it being one. It causes 5 to 20 follicles to start developing. Okay, so in males, it's millions of sperm a day. In females, it's 5 to 20 per month. Okay, so then it goes through the cycle. It takes about a week for it to mature into a functional egg that's all ready, and it kind of gets this like backup where it's like suddenly, oh, but it gets exploded out. Because the process of ovulation is incredibly violent because it has to be able to travel through this open space to where the fallopian tubes are. Okay, so it has to be a very violent process. You may have, sometimes people can feel when ovulation happens. It's rare, but it does happen. It's a sharp pain. If you have that sharp pain, it might mean that you have endometriosis. So make sure you get it checked. Okay, so the egg goes into the fallopian tube and may or may not get fertilized by the egg, but we're not done. Okay, so as the follicle is developing, just this whole stage, it's producing estrogens and progesterone. Okay. But then we're not done because the part that's left behind is like, oh yeah, we're going to make some babies. So I'm going to be producing hormones to make sure that the body is ready for that friggin' baby. So the corpus luteum is what's left over after the egg leaves, and it produces hormones, okay? If for some reason, so most of the time, fertilization doesn't happen, there's no feedback saying, yeah, we made a placenta, then this will end up dying. And then you shed your endometrial lining, okay? So let's talk a little bit more. Let's actually look, oh well, there is another very important hormone that happens called the luteinizing hormone. Again, just like in males, luteinizing hormone stimulates the production of testosterone in males. But in females, when luteinizing hormone happens, it causes that eruption of the follicle, causing the egg to be pushed out really quickly so that it travels into the fallopian tube. Again, the part that's left over is called the corpus luteum. It continues making progesterone, saying, yeah, we're doing this, reproductive, sweet, until it doesn't get feedback. So it only lasts like a week or two, and then it dies. So if you had implanted in the uterus, if you had implanted a fertilized ova, or now we're in if you had, if you planted a fertilized egg, then the progesterone production would be taken over by the placenta itself, okay? But if you don't, just the whole system shuts down and starts over again. Okay, so this is the only time ovulation's ever been captured on camera. This doctor was doing something else. So he was doing some kind of surgery, and he looked down, and he was like, that's weird, something bad. Oh, wait, that is a follicle that's being, you can see the other follicles that started getting produced, and then they just didn't keep going. This is a prodding thing that's used in surgeries, and he was doing something else. He looked down and he noticed that this was happening, and so he just started taking pictures because it's cool. And also, do you tell your patient that? I have no idea. And so what he noticed is, okay, this whole thing is the ovary. The follicle gets overstimulated and stimulated and stimulated, gets so ready to just squish that egg out. And then it's going to push it across the space into the fallopian tube. In this case, since he's holding it in a weird way, it couldn't actually just pop off. It needs to be like in the fluid that he's taken away because he's doing surgery. But it's interesting. It shows you, if this is the end of forceps, it shows you just how big the egg is. It's very, very, very small, but it's definitely visible. So it's our biggest single cell. All right. So what's happening? What the frick is it progesterone? How is it different from estrogen? So progesterone is produced by the corpus luteum, so the part left over after the egg leaves. Okay, so if we went over here, after the egg leaves, this would then become the corpus luteum. I don't know why we draw it as yellow. That's what luteum means. But really you can see it's red. So whatever. What does that do? So what that does is the egg, remember it takes 72 hours for the egg to get through the fallopian tubes and into the uterus. So what the progesterone that's being produced by the corpus luteum does is it's like, heck yeah, let's make sure baby making happens. It causes breast enlargement to try and attract a male. It causes your temperature to increase a little bit to help just get things ready. It causes more sexual behavior, so you attract a male. There's been studies, again, strange studies done in strip clubs where scientists go and they have females, they have the dancers tell them, what part of your cycle are you on and how many tips did you get? Because every dancer, a stripper, is going to want to make as much money as possible. They're not stripping because it's super fun. It's their job, right? And so it might be fun too, but it's also their job. They want to make as many tips as possible. And so that should be constant, just be wanting to make tips, right? To be constant the whole month. So they tracked these ladies through a whole month and found out they made the most money no matter how hard they tried. They always made the most money when they were ovulating. So there's something about the distribution of water that happens during progesterone production that causes females to look curvier and walk more sexily and just smell more sexy and all these things. And that's all happening because of progesterone, okay? So when okay, so estrogen is being produced by the follicle itself while the egg is still in there, and it is important because it causes the development of sexual organs, okay? So it causes the development of this entire system to even happen, okay? And again, it's stimulated by GnRH talking to LH and FSH, which then stimulates everything. It helps us develop our fat deposits. So why are women more curvy? It's because we have fat deposited in different areas. There's different thoughts. Why is that? Does it help us carry kids? I don't know. Take anthropology. You develop female hair patterns. And estrogen, remember, also is what causes your bones to stop growing. And the long bones will fuse at the epiphyseal plate as soon as estrogen hits at puberty. So many things. Okay. So let's talk about these hormones again. So GnRH is coming from the brain, from the hypothalamus, and it goes and it causes FSH and LH to be released from the pituitary gland. So what do? So these are hormones, so they enter the bloodstream and they travel through the bloodstream. Let's follow LH first. So LH causes ovulation, and the egg goes, yeah, and it goes into the fallopian tubes to get into the uterus. Okay, well, LH also causes the corpus luteum to keep developing. The corpus luteum causes progesterone to be released, and then progesterone causes the endometrium to get thicker and thicker and thicker. So, if nothing happens, then the corpus luteum dies in 2 weeks. So, no corpus luteum means no progesterone, which means there's nothing to support the endometrium anymore, and the uterus gets rid of it. So part of cramping in the menstrual cycle is the uterus squishing and just contracting to get rid of the endometrium because it doesn't need it anymore. Because it says, you know what? No baby, no endometrium for you. Okay, but that's not all. Progesterone also causes a stimulation. So let's go this way. GnRH causes FSH to happen, to be produced by the pituitary. That causes the follicle to be stimulated and mature, which then releases estrogen. So what estrogen does is, the reason why you have this X is because, just like with testosterone in males, once you have a high level of estrogen, the system becomes saturated. This travels in the bloodstream and turns off FSH. So you can't just continually stimulate follicles to get continuous eggs. This only happens cyclically. Okay, same thing with progesterone. Progesterone, once you have enough of it, it goes and it turns off FSH. It also turns off LH, but it's not on this. All right, so what if you do have pregnancy? Okay, so LH and FSH do the same thing. LH causes ovulation. The egg goes, oh, hey, it meets the sperm, and then the sperm and the egg come together into what's called a ball of cells, or a blastocyst. And then that starts producing HCG, which is human chorionic gonadotropin. This is what's released that just tells the body, pregnancies happen, get ready. And that will then go and maintain the corpus luteum for longer. So instead of just 2 weeks, this will last until the placenta can start taking over the progesterone, and then there's no more HCG being produced, so the corpus luteum can die, but the progesterone is being produced by the placenta and the embryo to keep the cycle from just shutting down. Okay, so a lot of birth controls just give you progesterone to make your body think, cool, we have a placenta and embryo, so we don't need anything else, we don't need to ovulate, and then a bunch of other things happen to make sure you don't get pregnant if used properly. Let's see. So when you take a pregnancy test, what you're testing for specifically when you pee on that stick is HCG. So if pregnancy has happened and it's far enough along that it can be detected, if that ball of cells is happening, then you're producing HCG. Hey, come on, my dog does not like HCG apparently. And then that can be detected in your urine. It's not that you are, yeah, we won't get into why, but that's why. Let's keep going. All right, so this just kind of shows what's happening at the same time. So when you have, let's see, so we start the menstrual cycle at, so day 0 is when you first see blood, okay? Gentlemen, just deal with it, okay? And so we do it by what happens externally, and because of what we know what happens externally, we can then see what's happening internally, okay? So, because it's not like we can look and say, my estrogen's high again, everybody, okay? We just know that as soon as menstruation happens, that means the system is shutting down, and so estrogen is at its lowest, and then over time it's going to go, and then it's going to peak, and ovulation happens, and that's because LH is like, yes, let's ovulate. And so then as that happens, the endometrial lining is getting thicker and thicker and thicker. And then there's a point where all of a sudden LH drops. And once LH drops, a day or two later, progesterone drops. And if there's no progesterone, then this lining can no longer be maintained, and the connective tissue dies, and it sloughs it off, and then menstruation starts again. All right, let's talk very briefly about fertilization, and then we'll wrap this module up. So fertilization is all about timing, okay? So an ovum is only fertile for about 24 hours. Sperm is only fertile. So remember, it takes an ovum 72 hours to get to the fallopian tube. So down the fallopian tube and into the uterus. So once the ovum is in the uterus, it may no longer be viable. You have to hit it in the fallopian tube to really make sure that fertilization happens. So sperm is only fertile for about 48 hours, okay? So if you haven't ovulated yet and sperm just entered the vaginal canal, you may not have fertilization happen. So why does it seem like teenagers get pregnant all the time? Well, it actually might be that they're ovulating a lot more eggs because they have higher hormonal levels, okay? So they have a higher chance of making reproduction happen. All right, cool. Keep going. So how does this actually happen? So the egg is actually more complicated than just being a simple cell. It's a cell that is surrounded by a lot of protective cells. It takes about 50 sperm to actually, remember the acrosome, the first part of that sperm cell contains a lysing enzyme, which will break through this corona, is what it's called. The outer, it's not a shell, it's just an outer layer of hardened molecules, I guess. And so it takes 50 sperm, just breaking it down and breaking it down and breaking it down until one finally gets to the specific part of the egg where fertilization can happen. As soon as fertilization happens by just one sperm, the chemistry of the egg, the outer membrane of the egg completely changes, so no other sperm can get in. Because polyspermy, or more than one sperm, means that you're going to have more than one source of DNA, which again leads to a lot of problems and usually leads to the death of the cell. Okay, so that's what this fast block thing is. So less than a second after that very first sperm gets in and touches the nucleus of the egg, we have what's called an acrosome reaction, and it completely depolarizes the rest of the egg. It changes the chemistry, so all the other sperm are repelled. A minute later, you have a bunch of calcium being produced, and it actually causes the outer membrane of the, so it's not just a repulsion at that point, the outer membrane of the fertilization, the now fertilized egg, gets really hard just to make sure no really intense sperm can get in either. Okay, so we're going to talk about birth control methods and then STDs and that kind of thing in these extra credit modules that I'll post next week. But this is the last lecture for the last test. Good luck. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.